Hi, welcome to Camera Cravings. I'm Andy, and today I've got another hands-on lens review for you. This time it's the Canon 800 RF f11 lens. Yeah, you heard it right, it's f11. This compact super telephoto lens that Canon's just brought out in conjunction with the Canon R5 and R6 cameras. And yeah, I'm going to give you a hands-on review, what my thoughts are, whether I think it's worth you buying or if it's a bit of a joke, like a lot of people have been saying. Okay, so I've come out to my local nature reserve to see if I can get some good use out of this 800mm lens. Give it a good test. It's, as you can see, it's cloudy. It's quite bright though, so just want to see what kind of shutter speeds and ISO I can go to, because these lenses are f11. So yeah, we'll have to see how we get on, and also see what the autofocus is like, because you only get a portion of the image sensor kind of autofocus system rather than the whole area. Okay, so been testing it for about an hour now. Just wanted to tell you what I think so that it reminds me as well while I'm out here. Do I think this is going to be good for birds in flight? Not really. I think you need really good light, bright days, because at the moment, see if I can show you, as you can see it's overcast, but it's not completely grey, and it's certainly not dark, and yet I'm having to shoot at ISO of minimum sort of 1200, 1600 to get a decent exposure when my shutter speed is about 800 or 1000. So for birds in flight, usually you'd want those kind of higher shutter speeds, particularly for fast moving smaller birds. Depending on what distance you're at and all that kind of stuff, there's lots of variables, but essentially it just feels like it's quite limited, which I expected, but it's good to test it and see. Obviously this lens has got an extending barrel design, which you have to actually unlock, extend the barrel and then lock it again before the camera will actually allow you to shoot with it. You get a little message up on screen that says set the lens to shooting position if it's not unlocked properly. So key features with this lens are the lightweight, compact portability of it. So at only 28 centimeters, even with the R5 attached to it, it will fit into my camera bag, my Peak Design travel 45 litre bag lengthways, and it's an 800mm lens. There's no way you could fit anything, even a 400mm would barely fit in that bag normally. So that's the big benefit of this lens, and the fact that you can hand hold it, you can walk around with it all day and not be too tired. Quite unheard of really in terms of size and weight. Obviously it's limited because of that. It's an f11 only. That means it is just f11. You don't get anything beyond that, so there's no kind of stopping down past that. It is f11 and that's it, which obviously gives the lens quite a limited nature in terms of what you can photograph when and how much light you need to get good shutter speeds with it. And with these new mirrorless cameras, it isn't like DSLRs. You do get to use them at those high f-stops and still get usable images, because you can have high ISO images and there's not so much noise in the image. So even at ISO 3200 or 6400, you're getting usable images from it. Whereas on a DSLR, a lot of the older DSLRs, certainly you wouldn't be able to do that at all, and you wouldn't be able to focus either. With the electronic viewfinder, you can see what you're doing, you can focus accurately, and you can get good images. So it's all stuff to be aware of, but you just need to understand that with these mirrorless cameras, they are much better for that kind of thing. So on the lens, you have the focus limiter, the AF/MF on switch, the IS switch for the stabilisation in the lens, and then you also have a manual focus ring which is nice and smooth, and in front of that you have your control ring that you can use to adjust settings like aperture and ISO and shutter speed. The lens doesn't have a tripod collar but does have a mounting point underneath for a plate or mounting it onto a tripod. Hand holding this lens with the R5 felt really well balanced. In terms of the image stabilisation in the lens, I found that it gave roughly the quoted 4 stops of stabilisation when hand holding. Yeah, let's talk about the build quality and the weather sealing on this lens. It's obviously a much cheaper lens than a lot of Canon's professional grade lenses, wildlife lenses. So we're talking, £900, I think it's £950, versus the kind of 800mm professional lens equivalent is, I think it's like £12,000 or £13,000. So it's a big difference, and you do notice that this lens, the build quality is not the same as some of Canon's other glass. It's very plasticky feeling. It's more like a spotting scope, I'd say, in terms of the kind of feel and quality of it. It's mainly plastics, but I don't think that's a big downside. It means it's lightweight and compact, and it is what it is. It's not going to be great in a rainstorm because it's not weather sealed in the way that some of Canon's other lenses are. So something to be aware of. You need to factor that in when you're thinking about this. If you're thinking about it versus something like the Sigma 150-600 or Tamron's equivalent lens, maybe that's something you take into consideration. I know Sigma's sport lens, the sport version, is actually weather sealed, so they give that extra quality. And because of the barrel design where it extends and contracts, you will potentially get dust and moisture on that part of the barrel, which will go into the lens. And Canon hasn't said that this is a specifically weather sealed lens, so take that into consideration when you're making your buying decisions. This is quite a specific lens for specific tasks. With that being said, the quality is still good. It still feels good in the hand, still feels quite robust. So, it's still a Canon lens, so you're still getting decent quality. It's just not going to be up to the standards of some of the professional lenses. So I've been quite surprised by quite how fast and accurate the autofocus is with this lens. Locks on really quickly. Even when you're kind of panning through a scene and you're completely out of focus, it then locks onto the subject really well. You've got the full tracking from the R5, so I'm shooting on the Canon R5, and you've got head, face and eye detect tracking, and when it can't do that, it still detects the body of a bird or an animal, so that's really good. Really impressed with that. The one downside, or the biggest downside, is that you only get, because it's an f11 lens, you only get a portion of the autofocus area. So as you can see from what I'm showing you now, which was recorded through my Ninja at waist level, so it's a bit jerky, but you get the idea of what you see through the viewfinder, which is basically you only get to see probably the central portion of the frame, which is maybe a third of the frame, maybe less. And that can be quite limiting in terms of composition, particularly when you're tracking birds in flight and things like that. It does mean that a lot of your images end up with kind of the subject centrally in the frame, rather than kind of rule of thirds or whatever else you want to shoot, which is fine, but can be a little bit frustrating. And also I did find that as soon as it goes outside that box, it does lose tracking of stuff. Yeah, there was a few times when I was tracking birds in flight and some of the swans and things, and the geese, it did lose the subject and it took a little while to come back, but overall really impressed with it. And then in terms of noise, obviously there's some pretty big motors in that 800mm lens, and the noise is actually pretty minimal. I found when it's focusing, particularly on the R5, it just seems to, you don't really notice it. Haven't noticed it hunting particularly. And yeah, overall the accuracy and speed of focus in that central portion has been really, really good. So quite impressed on that front. So I think when we're talking about image quality with this lens, it's quite a difficult one to answer. I think sharpness in the lens is actually pretty good when you're shooting in good light. So when you're at a lower ISO, the sharpness on a lot of the shots I took, I've taken about 1,500 shots over the last couple of days, and the sharpness is there in a lot of the shots where I'm at a lower ISO. I think the issue becomes when you're having to go up in the ISO range because you need to maintain a fast shutter speed. So if you're doing birds in flight or just whatever animal you're photographing, you just need that extra shutter speed. And obviously because it's 800mm and with the teleconverter it's even longer than that, it means that you do need the shutter speed. Even though the IS, the stabilisation, is really good in the lens, it is such a long lens, you still need to kind of try and have a high enough shutter speed, and it does mean that the image quality suffers, even with these new cameras, with the R5, the high ISO performance in, when there's low light is still good. It's very good actually, for given it's 45 megapixel camera, but you do see a degradation in image quality. So obviously that's not going to be unexpected to everyone who's watching this, who knows that at f11 you're not getting anywhere near as much light in as an f5.6 or even 6.3 lens, and certainly not f4. So it's just something to take into consideration. I'll try and show images throughout the video that illustrate this. The other thing I found was when I had the camera in the 1.6 crop mode, that image degradation was just a lot more noticeable. So when you're using the full sensor, it doesn't seem to matter so much. And yeah, distortion seems pretty managed. Chromatic aberration again seems quite managed. I haven't really noticed a huge amount. And vignetting again, you get a little bit, but put it in Lightroom and it just disappears instantly. So I don't think that's going to be an issue for you. Is it going to be as sharp as some of the other telephotos on the market? I think it's probably, I need to test the Sigma 150-600 with the Canon R5 because I've not done that yet, and I'm planning to in the next week or so. But I'd say I know those type of lenses, the zooms, are sometimes a little bit softer at the tele end, so at the 600mm end. So I think from previous experience, I would say it's comparably sharp to those lenses, maybe a little bit sharper. But again, it just depends what your lighting is. In good light, it's really good, but once the light drops, so I've been shooting at different times of the day and trying to shoot in lower light, even just on cloudy days like today, or on evenings when the light's drawing in a little bit, kind of at golden hour, you just find that the quality drops away because you've got to go to those high ISO levels. So you're talking about minimum 1600 a lot of the time I've been shooting at, or certainly 1250, 1600, around that. I've gone up to 6400 and it's been okay, but obviously it's not going to be as good as if you're using a lens where you can shoot at much lower ISO because you've got a wider aperture. So it's all considerations to think about, and not unexpected, but I just wanted to make everyone aware of the limitations you will have with this lens. Right, so just put the teleconverter on. I'm going to try that out now. This is my view out of one of the hides. There's not much in close range at all. Most of it is a long way off, like there's some geese out there, but yeah. I'm going to try it to see if it's vaguely usable. So having shot around 200 images with the teleconverter on, I didn't really notice any drop in image quality from actually using the teleconverter, other than I think there's a perceived drop to my eye because of the high ISO you have to go to, because it becomes an f16 rather than f11. So you've got even less light coming in, which means the kind of images you're getting look worse generally, because you're either having to drop your shutter speed, which sometimes means you don't get such sharp shots, or you have to up the ISO,
to levels at which it starts to make the image look worse than before. So overall, I don't think the teleconverter itself is making the image quality particularly worse, and it's more the fact that you're just losing that light. So on, for example, the 1:500 that I've yet to test, I think the teleconverter will look fantastic on that lens because it is an f4.5 to 7.1 lens, so you're getting that much more light in.
One thing I would say about the autofocus is that I haven't really noticed any change in terms of the quality of the autofocus and the speed. It seems to lock on just as well. You get the same central portion of the AF area. So yeah, it's seems to work really well. I mean, obviously you've got less light coming in, so the f11 becomes an f16, and if you put the 2x converter on, it becomes an f22. So you do need to factor that in, because I was struggling at f16. I'm not sure I'd use the 2 times unless it was a very bright day or you're using it for like moon photography or something like that. But yeah, it's worth trying the converters or the extenders, because you do get that extra reach, and it doesn't seem like there's much of a drop off in quality at all, if any. And yeah, the autofocus is really snappy still. Maybe a touch slower, very minor, but hardly anything. It's barely perceivable. Okay, so let's talk pros and cons of this lens. We put up here what I think the main pros and cons are. As you can see, the main ones for me are the size and weight. The fact that you've got such a portable, hand-holdable 800mm is really, really good. And I think it's really quite good value for money, really, when you think what you're getting, that 800mm sharp lens at that price point, considering the kind of f4 or f5.6 versions are so much more money. The big cons though are the fact that you have that f11, which really limits the usability. And I have found that unless I'm in good light, you do struggle with this lens. And that's even talking about in the daytime. So it's not going to be a lens you want to use at sunrise, sunset particularly, because you're going to have to go to such high shutter speeds unless your subject is actually a static subject. In that case, then fine, you can use it like that. But otherwise, the ISO goes through the roof and the shutter speeds need to stay up there. So yeah, it's not great for that. But I think overall, it does give another option for people. I think there's other options out there. I'm going to put up a list now of the kind of other lenses in this category. Some of them aren't going to get you 800mm, or most of them won't. They'll mainly get you 600 unless you add like extenders, but you do get probably slightly better overall image quality, more flexibility in terms of zoom range, because a lot of these are 150 to 600 lenses. You also get more of a fuller AF area, because that's the other big downside that I found with this lens, the fact that you've only got that kind of small box in the center portion of the frame, whereas even when you adapt, say, a Sigma 150-600, you're going to get most of the frame. From what I've seen, I've not tested it myself yet, but I have seen a few other videos where someone's been using them and they've showed the view through the viewfinder, and you do get a much bigger area for AF. So it swings and roundabouts. There's a lot of compromise with this lens, but there is a place for it, I think. So final thoughts on this lens. I think it is worth a purchase if you know the downsides and know the limitations, but you've got a particular subject in mind. One subject that I haven't talked about much, and I haven't shown you any images of yet because I wasn't able to get any, is photographing or taking video of the moon and other planets. And that is something that this lens is really good for. And unfortunately it was cloudy the 3 nights I had it. So I reached out to Frank over at Nuclear64. I'll link up his channel and his Instagram down below. But he kindly said that I could use some of the images that he'd shot with this lens, both the 800mm on its own and then with the 2 times extender as well, giving you 1600mm. And I'll put the images up on screen now of the moon that he got, which are just beautiful. I think it's astonishing what you can get with this kind of setup. And you can obviously crop in as well from this point. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think for that kind of stuff, it could be the ideal lens for you. For general wildlife in good light, again, it could be the ideal lens for you. At this price point, there's other options obviously available that are going to do better in low light and probably going to be slightly faster to focus and give more of a focus area and more flexibility. But if you want 800mm and you can't afford to go up to the professional grade level lenses, this could be one of the options that's good for you. So yeah, overall, I don't think it's a no-brainer to buy at this price. I think once the price drops a bit, maybe it will be. But I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you've enjoyed watching the images that I shot with this. I was pretty pleased with some of them. Some of the red kite images were decent. As I say, I'm not a wildlife photographer, so this is something that's more of a hobby for me. But yeah, I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please do like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell for notifications. And my next video is going to be on something a bit different. Probably going to be covering some stuff that Andy Siniev kindly sent me, which is a monitor and a microphone. So I might do a couple of videos on those. I'm going to keep doing some videos on the R5 in the coming weeks as well, and specific features like the Wi-Fi, the GPS, all that kind of stuff. So look out for those, and I'll see you in the next one.